All right. Everything looks like it is live. So, hi, welcome to session number 2. My name is Brian Palmer. I write as Brian C. Palmer, B.C. Palmer, and Simon Strange, and we are working on a book called For Honor. I did a lot of the brainstorming yesterday, and that was the main focus of yesterday's session. That's going to be the same thing. That's the same thing that I'm going to be mostly focusing on today. But yesterday I started to work out some of the character stuff, some of the world building stuff, that sort of thing. And not that there are any rules to writing fiction. You kind of like do it however you want to. Whatever works best for you, right? But one of the things that I generally try and remember is that for good fiction, and this is the thing that has tripped me up on this book a couple of times before when I sort of started it, and I mentioned this yesterday, is that I had started to work out the character stuff, but I hadn't really thought about like how does magic fit into the whole thing. It is a fantasy, right? So you've got a promise of the premise, and within fantasy, of course, there's high magic, low magic, that sort of thing. I like sort of a high-ish, mid-level magic system. That's the sort of like worlds that I like to tell stories about, the worlds that I like to build. It's the fantasy that I like to read. But there was a missing component yesterday, so I spent a lot of time after the stream yesterday thinking about what I was already missing, because like I can already sort of feel that kind of tension up here, right, telling me that I'm missing out on something. And one of the things that I should have remembered at the time is that one of the best ways, for me at least, to plan a story is to figure out ahead of time what it is that the villain is actually up to. And I have a specific brainstorm set for this that I pulled back down from the cloud. It's my villain first hook. So today I'm going to focus a lot on that, because I feel like I've got enough of a very, very generalized sort of world build sort of base, right? I have a general idea of what the two sort of focused sort of core factions or nations are in the story. And then I've got a sort of a general idea of this conflict within magic itself between the sort of native magic of Eldra, of this world, and this sort of alien magic that has come in from this other dead world, the event that people refer to as the Starfall, right? That sort of plunged the world in darkness, ended the first world, and that sort of thing. But I hadn't focused very much on the villain itself. So I've got this brainstorm set that is basically, I built this out with the idea that if you know who your villain is, and you know your villain's plan, if you know what they are up to, what has happened that they're taking advantage of, what is it that they're trying to do, where are the ethical lines for your villain, right? So what's the thing that your villain will do to get ahead, to get what they want? Is there a red line? Is there a place where they won't? Is there a thing that they wouldn't do, right? One of the main differences between your sort of villain characters and your heroic characters is almost always going to be that there are lines that the heroic characters won't cross, right? But that the villain potentially will cross if they get the opportunity. So I am one of those people. I can't sit in a chair like a normal person. So I'm going to shift around just a little bit so that I can sit cross-legged in this chair, because that's how it goes. I don't know. Maybe that was, if we'd known about the meme when I was a kid, I probably would have been identified as queer right away, because I can't sit in a chair like a normal person. All right. So anyway, so that's where I'm going to start today. But one thing that I want to change first here, we're going to do a new schedule. Schedule, because yesterday I found, we don't need to do all that. Let's do 20. Interesting. All right, well, like I said, I am in the process of developing this, and there are all sorts of tiny little bugs just like sort of sprinkled throughout still, so we're going to figure that out. But let's see, we want to do that for 20 minutes. I'm going to do a total of 4 hours, so that should be, yeah, we'll call it 8 and do 3 hours and 38 minutes, but who knows? I mean, yesterday I think this ran about 3.5 hours, so this seems like a good place. I'm gonna have to figure that out. Oh, yeah, I know what caused it, but now is not the time to figure that because that will break my attention. Okay, so yeah, so basically, if you can figure out what your villain, your antagonist is doing at the beginning, the way that I see it, your protagonists in a story, your heroic characters in a story, or anti-heroes or whoever, just whoever is the main character of the story, right? Generally speaking, what they do is they do things in response to something that the antagonist has done. So generally speaking, when your story first opens, in most adventure stories, fantasy in particular, but also sci-fi and other types of adventure stories, your villain generally has started their plan earlier on in the plot, right? Before the story actually starts. A lot of the time, they have been planning over time, setting things up, and then either the process of getting their plan in place is what causes the ripples in the story that bring the main characters into it, or the first thing that they do and as the execution of that plan, right? So I like to think about villains as people who spend a lot of the time hiding their villainy, basically, for a good long time, and then when they see the opportunity to pull the trigger on their plan, basically, that is generally when things start. Oh, hi, we already had somebody watching. Hi, Mark. Yeah, so anyway, so that's what I realized that I was like sort of skipping ahead. And again, there's not like major rules or anything like that around developing fiction. You can do things in any order that you want. But I have my own set of sort of like internal kind of cardinal rules. And yesterday I broke one of those. So today I'm going to focus a little bit on this method. I'm going to go through this particular brainstorm. For one thing, I want to show the brainstorm itself. This is one that I'm really proud of that I developed specifically for Scribi. Let's see if we can get a little bit, I don't want to make it hard to see on the stream, but I need some more real estate here. Yeah, so anyways, the idea here is that if you can figure out what are the conditions that allowed the villain or the antagonist to have their plan, what are they doing to take advantage of those conditions, what is it that they want to get concretely out of your story, right? What is your villain trying to do in a tangible way? So, for example, you might have a villain that is pursuing some sort of terrible dark magic because they have lost a loved one at some point and they want to bring that loved one back from the dead, right? That's a really concrete thing. And I don't think that your villain always has to have necessarily an entirely sympathetic plan or motivation or that sort of thing. That's not the way that I necessarily see villains in sort of that always having to be like the gray area. But I think that it is pretty good whenever you're able to, if you're able to manufacture a moment somewhere in the book where we hear about the villain's motivations, about what it is that they want and why they want it, that if that can be at least a little bit persuasive, if it's the sort of thing where your main character, where your hero can hear this monologue, this speech, or have this conversation and think to themselves like, okay, I understand why you want what you want, and I sympathize. But the lines that you cross to get what you want are just lines that I can't cross. Then I think that creates a great moment not only for your antagonist as a character, but then also a great moment for your main characters as well. So that's that's what happens in my brain whenever I sort of go through this process of trying to figure out like, okay, what does my antagonist want? How can it be sympathetic if I want to build that moment? And I think that I do kind of want to build that moment here. So there's about 17 minutes on this sprint. I'm going to probably not be quite as talkative as I work on this because I had a lot of stuff in my brain at like 2 o'clock in the morning, laying in bed, waking up in the middle of the night, suddenly thinking about things. So I am going to hop to it. And then in the next break, I'll take a look at chat. I'll see if there's anybody watching, and if so, if they want to. If you find it's going to be the same rules. I'm not going to jump in. I'm not going to jump in and out of messages while I am trying to get work done. But I do have the live sprint room open. So if you decide that you want to check out Scribi, you want to grab it for yourself, then you are able to come join me directly in the room itself here. Let's see, room settings. I could probably just put this on the actual screen, probably. But here is the room code, V8Z3PV5KZ2S3. And if you get into Scribi and you go in here into the message section, click this little key icon right there, and that'll pop you into the room. And you'll see, if you take a look at it, I get little updates there. It's just going to pop up a little notification, let me know that there's a message. You certainly don't have to do that. I am here as much to just like write in public and make sure that I actually do work, as I am to pitch Scribi. But if it looks cool, if it looks like something you want to play around with, there is a 14-day free trial, so you don't have to commit to anything. You can just pop in. All right, get my water so that I don't dry up. And let's get to it. I think I set up a special. Let's see if this actually works here. That should pop up so that the I'm kind of new to this whole live stream thing. I'm figuring it out, though. All right. What's happening in the world that creates an opportunity? Villains don't operate in a vacuum. Something in the world is broken, shifting, or vulnerable, and your antagonist sees a chance that others don't. A power vacuum after a king's death, a new technology that nobody understands yet, a war that's left everyone distracted. What's the condition that makes the villain's plan possible right now? So, yeah. I got some ideas about this because I was thinking about this dichotomy between the two types of magic before. We're going to have to give this substance a name at some point. Maybe not now. This desk is a little bit shaky, isn't it? That's all right. I really wish that there was like some music I could play in the background for this, but I think there's like a whole thing about copyright and running music, so I don't think I can necessarily do that. Maybe I could dig up something that's some kind of royalty-free music, or maybe it's something I've done music for D&D campaigns. I wonder if it's probably in scope to be able to use that music on a stream. Meh, well, we'll see. Frequently, I just work all day in complete silence. I always mean to turn some kind of noise on, but then, you know. Do we want to give our main villain a name now? You know what? I can't think of it now. But I'll come to it. Let's see. Let me think about these in concrete terms. I think maybe the mineral is just called Starfall. Hmm. I haven't really thought about the actual technological level of the world. I think in my head I was imagining your kind of like classic sort of ancient Middle Ages sort of level of technology, but I think there's an opportunity here with the idea of this mineral that can be used in ways. The magic of this mineral can maybe be used in ways that native magic can't. And I think I have been circling a bit of a theme in my brain around this about which is almost contemporary, about using the power of something that you can't trust, that something with an inherently corruptive power, but our humanity's tendency to want to use it anyway. There's a really cool meme going around about AI usage, really, that basically it's comparing it to the One Ring, right? This idea that like it was made of evil for evil, and that there is no use for it, which turns it to good. Which I, well, when it comes to AI, I mean, I don't know. I do feel like that is our most likely apocalypse. I think at the moment, if we don't burn out the climate first. But yeah, I think if we push it forward a bit into the initial and like the early stages of the industrial age, right? I'm going to need something more concrete, but I think this lays some foundation for it. I'll figure it out as I go. Um, Magic trains, and this is not because I'm autistic. The train thing, I don't have the train thing. It's just a coincidence. uh, so magic trains. Yeah, magic trains. So the villain. Capitalism is the enemy, enemy, guys. Always. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So I'll iterate over this a little bit. Like these things always change and they expand, and it starts out super basic. And part of the reason I want to so part of the reason that I want to do this live stream is in part to show that like sometimes you think about it in terms of sometimes you imagine the writer's process as like someone sat down and was like, "Ooh, I have a great story idea," and then they sat down and started writing that story idea. In my experience, that is like a really tiny part of the process. That really, what tends to happen is you've got some sort of inkling, you've got some cool thing. And for me, it didn't start with anything like this, right? For me, the initial idea honestly was like the book cover itself. Like I was playing around with Daz. I'm trying to develop my own art skills over time a little bit, because I've always wanted to be a competent artist, and like I've gotten like part of the way there. But so I started messing around with Dad's studio as a way of like putting together scenes and models and things like that, and then learning to overpaint them. There are a lot of really fantastic artists out there. The one who did this book cover, Amalia Chitelescu, she's the one who did this book cover, and she's phenomenal. And that is basically like her process, right? She lays everything out in DAZ, and then she does all the overpainting and detailing and stuff like that in Photoshop. And so I just had like there were these two models, and I was like, ooh, I love a size difference and I love an age gap, and these two models could look really hot together, basically. So that is where the cover idea came from, and then past that, I was just sort of like, I don't know. I'm gonna have to let this marinate for a little while. I've had that habit for a long time. I've had book covers in the past that I had for like a year, 2 years. I think I've never had a book cover quite this long before I started working on a book. But sometimes it's just an image, that sort of thing. So yeah, so sometimes the process is iterative. Sometimes you get the idea from an image. Sometimes it's actually an actual theme that you want to explore, that sort of thing. So for me, I'm kind of reverse engineering a little bit from the actual image itself. But I think there is something here. I think there's something to this. I really want to give my villain, my antagonist, a name. Let's see, naming things. Yeah. Yeah, we'll go with that for now. Fadrum Call. Fadrum Call will be our bad guy. There's something about the like two-syllable, one-syllable thing that just like fits for villains. I don't know why. But yeah, so all right, Fadrum Call. So Fadrum Call. Let's see, who is Fadrum Call? I'll work out some details about that now, but this is a good start for that. So let's see. Let's go on to the next one. Who sees that opportunity, and what do they want? Not world domination, unless you can make that specific. So it's been a long time since I looked at this brainstorm. It's one of the first ones that I built up for the Scribi library, and the reason that I put that in there is because like world domination is a perfectly villainous reason to want to do something, right? But like I always wonder, like, what do you want to dominate the world for? What is your outcome that you're hoping for, right? I think that villains need a clear reason for everything that they do. And when I try and think about justifying, like, okay, who wants to rule the world? Like, I don't know. If I think there are probably some good reasons to work out, but it always just seems like boring for me. I don't know. I think that a really intelligent villain, I think, knows that if you take over as like king of the world, then you become like the main target for everything, right? Like there is a whole world of infrastructure that you have to build in order to protect your status as king of the world, and assuming that you're not also seeking, invulnerability and immortality and all these other things, if you basically are trying to be a god, which is a legitimate antagonist goal, then at the end, like, why do your life is just going to be miserable. There's no way that you can. I think we have at times we see villains who are sort of two-dimensional, and that it's time for a short break. Well, good. I was already on a roll. I think that we sometimes see villains who are a little bit two-dimensional in that they're not really thinking far enough down the line. And I think an intelligent villain does think down the line and thinks to themselves things like, okay, once I take over the world, how do I secure my position? What happens in the world after that? How am I going to reshape things so that this persists? And if there is not an opportunity for something like to be immortal and invulnerable and omnipresent or whatever, then there's no way to be happy in that world. And I think that one of the fundamental things that you probably have to decide about your antagonist is probably, does this person, this antagonist, this force, if it's a person, right? Because there's man versus nature, man versus cosmic horrors, things like that. Man versus monster. But in man versus man, though, in human versus human, when you've got an intelligent antagonist, you've got to think about, does that antagonist want to be happy? And or have they abandoned all hope of ever being happy? And these are two really important distinctions. This thing can turn your entire antagonist, and how they plan things, what they want, how they want it. And I think that our villain. Here we go. I've already forgotten his name. I do this all the time. Fadram Call. I think Fadram Call. I think does want to be. I think this is a person who wants to be happy and whole and complete in some way, but is just deeply selfish in a way that is going to make is going to make him an antagonist, make him a villain, right? So technically on a break, but nobody's asking questions. I don't know that anyone's even watching, which is fine. So let's see. Fadram Call. So the opportunity. Let me not jump ahead. Well, I mean, it's fine to jump ahead. He wants to lay claim to this resource. And to get that, yeah. Yeah. I mean, short break's almost over at this point, but and I kind of worked through it. But basically, yeah, I think it's beginning to become a story about capitalism being the bad guy. Basically, this idea that yeah, there's some thematic stuff there that I think will end up getting a nice dig over time to mine it for really specific stuff. But I think, yeah, I think Fadram, I think he imagines himself as this hero of the people, as this person who is like, if we can get our hands on this resource, if we can build this new world, then we can do away with monarchies and most of the government and things like that. And I am a left I'm a left-leaning person, but I don't believe in writing on a soapbox. I think that theme is something that emerges naturally from the story, and that the goal of the author is not to step on a soapbox and tell everybody the right way to live. I think that the goal for the author should be to tell a really good story that's grounded in basic human conflicts, right? And this is a good one. This is a good human conflict. The conflict between, money and nature, or wealth and nature, the conflict between nature and other resources, right? So this is someone who is basically saying like, yeah, this substance is dangerous and it's corruptive, but we can use it the right way, and if we do, then we can use it to create wealth and all this other stuff, right? And then over the course of the story, when it comes to theme, which is now that it's starting to emerge, it's something that is on my brain. The nature of theme to me in good fiction, that can be theme driven without being a soapbox, is basically it's an argument, right? You're making two sides of an argument. You're making one side with your main characters, and you're making the other side with the antagonist, and you're pitting them against each other, and you're showing the ways in which the heroic characters, your protagonists, they are going to make arguments with their actions and with in the ways that they resist the antagonist, for example, right? And then the antagonist is going to make their argument in the things that they do and how they get ahead in the world, how they get their edge and that sort of thing, right? So when you show this argument playing out in terms of action and events and things like that, then what you end up with is something that can definitely be thematic, and it can definitely carry a message, right? But you're not necessarily hitting anyone over the head with that message. You're leaving it up to the reader basically to go through the journey of the story and figure out who they really agree with. And as long as there is, well, I'm not going to get into now because it's a work session and I shouldn't get distracted. So let's get back to this. Let's see. Okay, so that was one of my favorite lines from Animal Farm. It's the idea that we are all equal, but some are more equal than others. That's a great. It's good to give your antagonist a kind of touchstone philosophy of some kind, something that you can use as the author to anchor their dialogue, anchor their inner world, those sorts of things. And I think that's a good one for Fadram. This idea that what I want is to, yeah. I'm going to put it in this. always feel like that's a good exercise to give your antagonist early in the process some kind of like a little bit of a monologue, basically. Like, what is it? Like, what do you stand for, right? I think this is a good one for Fadrum. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to what causes the what why it's a problem. So, um, you look on the face of an antagonist, and they have these ideas, right? They have this plan. They have these things that they want to accomplish, and you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of that, right? Because if there is no real cost to it, like let's say that Fadrum was like, I've discovered a clean resource for power. We can use this for all sorts of technological purposes, and it can, it can bring medicine to the sick. It can expand, the reach of trade across the continent, that sort of thing. It can do all of these really good, great things, right? If you are able to look at your antagonist plan and say, like, actually, that's a good idea. Like, everybody actually should be on board with it. Um, then you don't really have like an antagonist with an antagonistic plan, right? That's not a plan. A plan that's good for everybody doesn't antagonize anyone, right? So part of the process of figuring out and molding that plan is figuring out like what are going to be the bad consequences, right? What are the costs and the what is the price tag for what the antagonist wants? Because that price tag is the difference between a good idea and someone who wants to do something really bad. So let's see. So what he wants has to be a problem, and I think. Okay, so Fadrim is sort of beginning to coalesce for me a little bit. Uh, a student of alchemy and engineering, someone who has the necessary knowledge to actually like bring these things to life in some way. And I think maybe we'll expand on that as we build out his toolbox for like how he does things, how he acts in the story, how he acts against the protagonist, and that sort of thing. So I think he's explored things like automatons and that sort of thing, and so I'm building towards like sort of a not exactly steampunk setting precisely, but still a yeah, like a magic industrial sort of thing. Yeah, I think I like that as an idea. Huge, big. I think there's a lot of good stuff there for building a really rich setting in which you're right on the edge of a change in the age. Right, that's always a great period. There's always all sorts of really great stuff that you can do with that. And then we can sort of showcase the differences in the two sides of the treaty line. Yeah. Um, I think it maybe. I think it needs to be more. Yeah, it needs to be more unacceptable though. There needs to be a much darker sort of red line there. I want to dig into this before I go further. So, what I'll show you now then is so this button here. I haven't really used it yet because I haven't really felt the need. But this is one where I know that there's stuff here, and I know that this is a little bit like all of this is kind of like just spilling thoughts onto a page, that sort of thing. But it's super useful to be able to sort of dig into this a little bit deeper. So that's what we're going to do, and I'll tell you what's happening under the hood here is that basically when you we're going to hit a little bit of a oh. There, how's that? Yeah, all right. Most of my lighting is just natural light from the outside world here. I could probably bring in a little bit more of that. There we go. A little bit of daylight. Never hurt anybody. Well, unless it gives you skin cancer, in which case it's, hurt millions of people, I suppose. All right. So, anyways, what happens here as with the AI assistant turned on? Basically, what's going to happen is the assistant is going to read through both the prompt and then my answer to the prompt, and then basically like find places and propose new questions that are unique to this session, right? So if I were to take this whole, if I were to update the prompts and that sort of thing, and then export it as a template, if this is all brand new, then the dig deeper questions are world specific, right? Book specific. They're not. They don't get exported in the template. So that is just a thing to know because I'm here and sort of explaining how Scribi works, so that's part of it, right? So we're going to click dig deeper, and basically what I want to dig into is, which I think the model will probably pick up, and if it doesn't, I can just add an extra bit in there. But basically, yeah, I need to dig around in this and find out like what the real issue is. Let's see. Okay, so here's what it came back with. You said the corruption might show in Fadrim something that's easy to hide for now. What is it? A physical mark, a behavioral tick, a way his thinking has warped that he rationalizes away, and what would make someone who knows him well finally notice it? Which is an excellent question, and that's the nature of the whole like dig deeper thing. Basically, it's like take these general ideas and ask for more concrete specifics, right? I think that you can tell a story that's that is sort of built on vagueness, but it's really hard when you've got like something really specific and concrete that you can use in the planning material, in your outlining and that sort of thing. Then when it comes time to have to actually show something rather than tell something on the page, right? Then you've got those concrete details that you can bring in. So this is an excellent question. Something easy to hide for now. I think so. Short break. Short break. Get some water. That is some water. Don't dry out. Yeah, so physical stuff, something that someone would see and be like, hey, what's that about? So something that he intentionally covers up then. Yeah. So, an antagonist who is basically like gradually growing more and more emotionally unstable. And I think that this is so one of the things that I have to start thinking about at this stage. Developing the antagonist is basically like how much of the antagonist's existence, how much of their life in the story is inferred, how much is shown on the page, that sort of thing. And the most common convention for Romantasy right now is for it to be written in first person, often first person present tense, which is not a tense that I really like. If I was going to write in first person, it'd probably be first person past tense. But with something like this, if you want to build out your antagonist and if you want them to take up real space in the story, you could always give them point of view, of course. That's absolutely a valid option. I have a hard time doing that with first person. To me, first person works best when it's really tight in with the protagonists, right? The fact that there are things that the protagonists are certainly not gonna know about Fadrum, I think means that this story will probably have to be written in third person close, right? I could do third person close. It remains to be seen whether I feel like I want Fadrum to actually have point of view. I might pick out one of his lieutenants or something like that and make that person the point of view, so that we do get to see Fadrum on the page. We do get to see hear his monologues. We get to know what it is that he wants and why he wants it and that sort of thing, and maybe also show the other relationship that he has. So I don't know. That might be actually, it's a device, and it's one that I haven't really used in a romance before, but I also haven't written this specific kind of romance before. But I wonder if Fadrum has a romantic relationship with one of his lieutenants, someone who really deeply believes in everything that he's doing, and who truly does love him as a person, is deeply in love with him, so that basically we can show that there are these two romantic relationships in the story, right? There's the one between Jurok and Oren, our sort of like our main characters, and as a romance, we know that they are going to have a happy ending, right? They're going to have a happily ever after. That's one of the requirements of the genre. Which is good. Which is good. It's good to know. One of the things that I have loved about writing romance in the past, is that it is not terribly difficult. I mean, it's not that it's not difficult to figure out the ending, but there are conditions about the ending that you know in advance, right? Like you know that the characters are going to have their happily ever after, or their happily for now, depending on what kind of a book or series it is. Um, but but without that, a lot of the time you have to figure out so much more about the ending. And with romance, you get at least this one detail where like, okay, there are these two characters, their relationship, their outcome is sacred. Their relationship is for sure going to end, go to a happy place, right? So taking it into third person means that I can potentially tell a parallel story about a doomed romance, about what it means to be deeply in love with someone who is corrupting themselves in real time, and you're watching it happen, and you know that, or you feel that it's worth it. You accept that that corruption is worth it, but it still breaks your heart, right? I think that that would be a really great character arc for someone. Probably not for Fadram, but someone close to him. So yeah, later on I gotta get into who the lieutenants are, but I'm gonna pin that as something to think about. Okay, so the next one that it popped us here. He accepts his mortality and sees himself building a future he will not see, but he is also working on extending his own life. Those two stances are at war with each other. Which one does Fadram actually believe, and which one is the story he tells himself? That is also a very insightful question, because there is the this is another this is actually this is a great thing for all character stuff, right? There is the truth that you, if you were to look it in the face, you couldn't possibly deny the facts of the thing, right? But then there is also narrative. There are the things that you tell yourself about those facts, about those truths. Um, yeah. Hmm. Okay. I don't think he's actually doing it. Here's a point. Uh, I frequently forget to include straight people in my stories. A lot of the time, I forget to be like, should this person have a straight friend? Um, yeah. So, what kind of relation? Who is Fadram in a relationship with, and what is their nature? What is the nature of the relationship? Um, yeah. I think he's. I think I'm gonna go full on. Well, so I do know that Jurok, uh, the orc main character, orc daddy. I know that he is not strictly gay, and I think that is because I've already kind of worked out when I was working out some of the stuff about the Kato Chal, the orc language. I already have built a lot of culture into the language itself, right? Because I think that when you're gonna we may get into that a little bit later, because there are some things that I need to work out about Oren's sort of integration into that culture, right? But I think that that Orican culture doesn't really like have a clear like already there are no like real gendered pronouns in the language, right? And that is in part because of just where I kind of took the inspiration for the language from a little bit Slavic, a little bit Russian, or a little bit Scandinavian, a little bit Russian, Scandinavian in the construction, and then Russian with a lot of the sounds and that sort of thing. But what I've established so far is that Orican doesn't really have gendered pronouns as such. And their idea of gender is really not about like man, woman, male, female, or any kind of spectrum of that. And instead, they've sort of reversed it to the point where gender is sort of an unknown concept, and instead it's just sort of your role in society, which is all, of course, is mutable, right? So it's less about like a woman has to do these things and a man has to do these things, and people who are somewhere in between or non-binary or who change from one to the other, like that's not really a concept in their culture. The idea is basically like you act for the good of the community, and that's just the end of it. And so. So to say that Jurok is gay, for example, really wouldn't be entirely accurate, right? Jurok Jurok's sense of sexuality and attraction is going to be like a fun, complicated thing to explore in the story. I've got a lot of that already kind of worked out in my brain. But I think that Fadrum's love interest is a guy. Yeah, I think we've got a gay hero and a gay villain, basically, is what it amounts to. It's not like straight people need a ton of extra representation. I mean, no offense to straight people. It's just everything's about straight people. So, yeah, his love interest is kind of basic. Fadrum and Fadrum and no, that's too close to Orin. Fadrum and ooh, what if it was Orin's older brother? I'm gonna play with it. I'm gonna see. It makes sense. It makes sense that Ulduvar would be a really fantastic ally for Fadrum and a way for Fadrum to have an in with the royal family. And maybe he's kind of like I already know that Ulduvar's is well educated. So maybe he and Fadrum have connected at some point in the past. Yeah, that'll be that'll be good. That'll end up being really good. That'll be end up pitting Orin and Ulduvar against one another in a way. Uh, there are obviously spoilers in this. I mean, honestly, the whole idea behind this is to actually develop and write the entire book on live, right? So I don't feel like I can hide things from you over the course of this. So spoilers. One of the big bads is going to be Oren's older brother Ulduvar. So yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. So there's some world building there as well that I. Do I want to grab that? I might want to grab that now. Oh, hi, baby. That's my husband. Um, yeah, okay. So there's some extra world building happening there about the free territories. I'm going to note it down real quick while that's on mine. Did I add the free territories here? We did not. Starfall, Erdanian Empire. Yeah. Ba, ba, ba. We'll call that a nation. Free territories. We'll add a note. Well, okay, yeah. I need a way to put the note. Let's see. Well, actually, you know what? I think I can do it from here. Let's see if I did this right. Stop. That's perhaps the reason they've been for a long time. Nope, it doesn't go from there. It'll go from the manuscript. I'm gonna note that down as something to add later. Let's see here then. In that case, free territories, nations, free territories, details, notes. We're gonna add a note. Free note. Yeah, so good world building there. Random thing that just kind of jumped out. This idea that, and this will have consequences like overall for things like what their culture is like and what's the tension like between these two worlds of culture, right? Everything below the treaty line and the free territories, like how did they come to live in that place? Why did they get pushed into that place? Whatever. So I've already established earlier that they were given those territories when they fought for them during the Age of Bleakness, like right at the edge of the Age of Imperium, right, and or the Imperial Age, and so I like this idea that these are a collection of people who got pushed into a place where the Empire at the time was like, you know what, this is a war of attrition. It's not worth fighting over for this. You know what, if you want this corrupted land, then you can have it, and we'll just come in and mop up and whatever, as long as you all stay below the treaty line and stay in this corrupted land. And what nobody, I think, expected was that they turned around and built a relationship with the land, right? Built a relationship with not the corruption itself, but with what they saw as a sickened place that needed to be healed instead of avoided. And I think that already, like a lot of the stuff that I've done with the culture and the language and that sort of thing, sort of lends itself to the idea that there is a deep relationship between their people and the place where they exist and what they do with the land and what they do to the land and that sort of thing. So there's some more thematic stuff. I try not to dig out the deep theme stuff until later on in the process, but I like the idea that there is a theme building up between these two different cultures and how they relate to the world, right? One culture that wants to heal and get rid of this corruption in some way, and another culture that is ultimately looking to, or a faction of another culture that is ultimately looking to exploit that corruption. So yeah, I think that's going to lead to some fun stuff. It also creates a world just in terms of like the actual like story mechanics itself, which is another thing that it's always good to be thinking about, right? It's a fantasy, it's romantasy, there should be adventure, there should be danger, things like that. So this idea that they have been in the process of healing this corrupted land lends itself naturally to all the stuff that comes out of that corrupted land, right? It's a classic fantasy trope, a corrupt land, corrupt environment that creates corrupted life in some way. So that'll be fun. We can do all sorts of like monster hunts and monster attacks and things like that. Rule of cool, it's always good to have things like that there. All right, so we've established each other. So there is still the matter of the facts. What does Fadrum tell himself versus what's actually true? And I think that Yeah, we'll see. I think that's something that will gradually unfold a little bit more. It's possible that'll unfold better in the pain. I mean, maybe Fadrum is really just basically at his core a revolutionary. The idea that like I want to ignite this spark, and I don't expect to see the end of it. Maybe the accumulation of wealth for him is not really the thing. Although it's possible that he does want that full... Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that gives Ulduvar an interesting motivation to sort of that I can dig into later on. Basically, the idea that Fadrim is a revolutionary, and he sees himself as experimental in a way, right? He has been uh, building technologies. He's been developing alchemy. He's been using this corrupted resource in a way that's for sure killing him in the end. Like he knows it'll kill him in the end or turn him into something terrible in the end. There are fates worse than death, and it's sometimes having, especially an antagonist who is willing to accept a fate worse than death to get what they want, means that there are very few lines that they won't cross on the way there. But yeah, so making Ulduvar just a little bit more complex in that way, so that he's got these what you call a not a conundrum, but and not a conflict. It is a conflict, but the word is it is a the word fails me. I want to say it's a C word. Um, Man, it's gonna kill me. Short break. I could probably look it up. I've this is a thing that my brain's been doing more and more lately. Um, Conflict, conundrum. There's nobody watching. I'd ask you to put it in chat if you can think of the word. Anyways, there are these. It's a dilemma. It's not a C word. It's a D word. Most of my favorite words are D words. Ha. But yeah, so it's a dilemma for him, right? Because he wants these two things. He knows that I think he believes that what Fadrim wants to do is going to require him to be this revolutionary martyr, and that maybe without that part of the process, maybe Fadrim doesn't get what he wants, and therefore Ulduvar doesn't get what he wants. So he knows that it has to happen, and we'll sort of mold the antagonist's plan around this idea, right? So that Ulduvar knows that Fadrim ultimately has to be some kind of a revolutionary martyr. He knows that Fadrim has an expiration date, basically, and he wants to carry on that legacy. And at the same time, he wants to save him as well because, it's the man that he loves. So yeah, I think that'll be great. That'll be great. That'll work really good. Okay. It is a short break. Water. Get water. Don't dry out. But I haven't really been great about taking my short breaks, clearly. Which is fine because I've been breaking up the actual work sessions with like chatting and stuff like that. But so the faithful, what do they think they are signing up for? Do they know about the Starfall corruption, the weapons, the terrors Fadrim considers acceptable, or has he sold them on a cleaner version of the revolution? Yeah. Okay. So that becomes another layer of storytelling there, another layer of the kind of world building. The idea that that Starfall is sort of maybe more over the age that the Empire ran. I think that Starfall is part of what gave them the military and other types of might that was necessary to build an empire, right? An empire that, according to the lore, sort of like, ruled over the known world. And that, and perhaps ruled over the known world. I think maybe it was an empire that spread over the entire world. There isn't there. I think in the map that I have in my head that there are two main sort of land masses. That may change. I haven't made the map for the world yet. But but the idea that there is perhaps a remnant of that empire still out in the west. Yeah, something like that. So that during that imperial age, the the people of the Irdanian Empire, I believe, they collected up much of the actual material, right? So most of the material on this continent, that they found large deposits of it here and there, that they mined it and used it. So over an age of empire, they have largely cleaned up a big part of what their main continent and everything. And that since then, that corruption has not necessarily been entirely cleansed, but it's been eased by not having this stuff around. So that this becomes a story about lost knowledge being rediscovered as well. Okay, that clarifies things a little bit. So it's not a revolution in the sense of let's tear down the current world and bring about this world of total equality and all this other stuff. What Fadram really wants, I think, is to essentially bring back this empire, this idea that, like, okay, this is the knowledge that gave them the power to control the world, the power to spread. And that maybe so at some point in his history, he will have gotten access to histories of the Irdanian Empire, knowledge about the Irdanian Empire that may have been lost for a long time. Whether that was a question of discovering some small fragment of knowledge and then going out to seek other pieces of it, and collecting it and hoarding it in a way, right? Because it's the sort of thing where I think as a good villain, he is jealously guarding knowledge, right? He knows how valuable the knowledge is that he's collected and wants to make sure that it stays collected, that it stays with him, so that it can be concentrated in one place. And so maybe the people that work with him and around him, those people that are helping him to bring about his vision, that he is doling out little bits of incomplete knowledge, essentially. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think that's turning into something. That is turning into something there. Okay, so you called the consequences far-reaching and terrible. Give me one concrete, irreversible thing that has already happened because Fadrum started experimenting with Starfall. Not something he predicts or a risk that he accepts. Something that is already done and cannot be undone. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. See, you know, I know that doing this live and having a record of this and having people see me utilize AI in some way to do things like this, I know it's going to sit wrong with some people, and I know I had one of a I had a fairly long time reader of at least the Simon Strange books yesterday hop on and voice their concern about the claim was that Scribi is AI, which is not accurate. And I said this at the end of that stream. Scribi is not AI. That's not how. That's not exactly. That is not accurate to say. It can be hooked up to integrate an AI assistant, but there are some really strong guardrails there. And in fact, I kind of worked on strengthening some of those guardrails today, um, just because it's a thing that I periodically check against, and I try and get the model to do things like, hey, answer this brainstorming prompt for me. Hey, take all this brainstorm stuff and turn it into a beat sheet. And the model won't do that. It resists, and I think that that's right. I think that large language models should not be producing creative content for us. I kind of went over my stance on that yesterday. I'm not going to entirely repeat myself today, um, but but there but there I do believe that there are good uses for artificial intelligence in the creative space. I don't think it should replace our creative voice. I don't think that it should be coming up with ideas from us, because I don't think it's ever going to come up with something nearly as interesting. Like even in this brainstorming process, the process of going through and digging into a character and trying to figure out, like, okay, what does this villain, what does this antagonist want, why do they want it, what are they willing to give up to get it, who is important to them, things like that. If I had just prompted a model, if I had prompted the assistant and said, like, I don't know, pitch me a good villain and give me some good motivations and things like that, there's no way it would have come up with anything close to as interesting as what Fadrum has turned out to be. And and that is because it doesn't these models, they don't they may reason in a sense that they sort of iterate through, like a semi-thinking process, but they don't loop forward like a human brain does. Go forward, then loop back, then go forward, then discover something and figure out, oh, that's actually something. The assistant will have a hard time digging through all of this brainstorming content because there is so much conflicting information in it, and that's the nature of a brainstorming process. You riff and you come up with something. I started out with Fadram being someone who I was imagining as like a future wannabe billionaire, right? And then over the course of sort of figuring out what he wants and why he wants it, what he's willing to do, what his resources are, who's close to him, it's developed into something that is, I think, a lot more interesting and a lot more complex about someone who is like, yes, I want power, yes, I want to change the power structure of the world. I know that I'm not going to be there for that. So now I know that his motivation cannot be wealth, right? So there are things that I've cut out of out of the potential for his story, and cutting things out is as important as putting things in. Anyway, so that is part of why I have the stance that I do on what is AI useful for, and in what ways is it useful, and what are the specific limits that should be put on how it's useful. And I built those limits into Scribi because this is my writing environment, this is my application, this is how I envision, um, building a build. This is how I envision building a book, right? This is the process that I wanted to engage with, and that process just doesn't involve having AI write stuff for you, because why? Because that's no fun. This process has been so fun, right? Digging into this stuff, um, and also discussing it out loud, because that's not something that I've done before, and I've never really externalized some of my process this way. And so just yesterday and today have been like really like fantastic learning experiences for me about my own process, and that's what I really wanted to. That's what I wanted to see happen with Scribi, and yeah. Anyways, I'm not going to go on a diatribe about that again. Instead, let's focus on something that is already done that cannot be undone. That I think that Fadrum recognizes the potential for the use of Starfall as a weapon, and I think part of that is because he has tested it before. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Fadrum discovered initially two main things. I think he discovered a means of distilling some minerals from the starfall material. He was able to get his hands on some of the actual starfall material itself. He used this alchemical fragment of knowledge to figure out how to distill the mineral down to something that he could either ingest or embed. I'm leaning towards like something that he ingests. I'm leaning towards something like he has a small. He's only had access to so much starfall, right? Just a little bit, and that he has used that starfall to do two things. That he has an alchemical substance that he ingests that's mineral based, that basically gives him access to magic. And I think that he will say that you've got to be careful about how you use this starfall magic, because I think that native users of Eldrin magic can probably sense to some degree that corruption, but they can only sense it when it's in action, right? So there are magic users in this world. There are mages and things like that. But I don't think that for Fadrum to just be in their presence, I don't think that they necessarily can sense the presence of that corruption directly. I'm imagining that this is like a specialized kind of knowledge or a specialized skill, right? So So maybe that corruption would be more obvious to magic users from the free territories because they've probably seen more of that corruption and they kind of know the subtleties of how it feels to be around it or something. But I think that your average magic user probably does not necessarily recognize that unless someone is actually using that magic. And even then, I think that it's old enough and out of no one has used Starfall magic in such a long time that if you felt it as another magic user, if you felt someone using that magic, you would know that something was wrong, but you probably wouldn't know why it was wrong, right? Or what you wouldn't be able to interpret the data, right? You'd know that there was a signal of some kind, but you wouldn't be able to decode the signal. Yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards. Okay, great. So with that said, we know that he has access to some of this magic, and then I think the other thing is the technological side of it, that he built a device and he wanted to test it. Now the question is, why not test it? Why test it around people? I think that he didn't know what it was going to do. Yeah, I don't think that he knew it was going to be destructive. I'll have to figure out. Um, Yeah, okay, so as the story opens, there has been this recent event. It happened maybe a few months ago in the timeline. Let me go ahead and think about exactly what that looks like. So we know that it starts. When did we decide it starts? Outline 3:55, long dark. Okay, 15th of the long dark. So 3:55. Actually, let's say that it happened almost a year ago. 3:55 of Still Earth. The 10th. Early in the morning. I mean, I don't have to be really specific with the time, I guess, technically, since it's really about the actual date. But track history, title. Sure, why not? Yeah, I'm going to add that just so that I have it pinned for later. So the story opens, and there has recently been this weapon of mass destruction basically set off, and it has made I think it's spooked everyone. It has spooked the actual people in Kelvier. It's spooked the royal family. I think it happened in a neighboring nation. I'll have to figure out what the name of that nation is, and maybe give them a little bit of a treatment. But I think what happened is that Fadrum basically built this device and was like, I am confident about how this is going to work, and that this is going to make things better. It's going to be a source. It's going to be a power source, but I can't do this at home. So I think that he, established a laboratory basically in this other city outside the borders of his own home country, went there and was experimenting, and something went terribly wrong, and he discovered that Starfall could be used as an immensely powerful weapon, like a weapon of mass destruction, and that when it was set off, when he survived because he had magic on hand, basically, he had compatible magic on hand, he was able to survive what happened, and then left that place, came back home, and started to really think about, like, okay, this is how the Erdanian Empire spread like they did. This is what made them so powerful. This can make me powerful. This can make us powerful. We can build this empire again. Um, yeah, and I'll have to figure out why. I don't think he's a patriot. I don't think he envisions the Kelvirian Empire, right? I think he envisions like establishing a new empire, like, uh, yeah. Okay, I think that's some good stuff. It's a long break. I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna go away. I'm gonna have a short sort of bio break. Let's stick this back up to editor focus. Is there? Let's see. How about? Yeah, how's that? Long break. Back soon. Ta-da! I can put the same one over here, I think. Yeah, there we go. That'll work. I think that's probably showing. So, yeah, I'll be back in just a bit. Yes. Do you want to say hi to all the people? Come here. That's my dog. That's my dog. There's Willow. Hi, Willow. Hi, my sweet girl. Hi. Yes, I know. Willow thinks I was making a protein shake for her. I was not. I will eat something solid after all of this, but a protein shake for lunch. Okay, so there's still about 7 minutes left on that long break. Hi, my love. Hi, my sweet. All right, so this has been a process. This has been interesting. So I think what we know then is we know why Fadrim wants something to happen in the free territories. So the next bit, well, actually, that's the next bit in the brainstorming process, right? What's the full plan, step by step? So, yeah. So I think the start of the story is definitely going to be basically the delegation from the free territories. Oh, do you want to go out again? I may have to step away and take my dog out a second time. She wasn't satisfied. But I think I know that the story opens with the. I think the story opens for sure with a delegation basically coming from the free territories with a that of course features Jurok, right? That's how Jurok and Orin ultimately meet. So something has happened. I think it's related to the spookiness around there. So maybe the free territories have basically like taken note that something has happened, and they have basically reached out to Kelvir, the closest bordering nation, to be like, what the fuck is going on in your backyard? Someone has decided we need closer ties of some kind because of this worry about an unknown enemy, right? Nobody actually knows, nobody realizes that it's Fadrin that's done any of this. So now a couple, maybe multiple nations are really involved in this. There is, oh yeah, there we go. It's a summit. There's a summit at Kelvir, and Fadrim has taken advantage of this, okay, right. So there is Fadrim is kind of like an advisor to Ulduvar, basically. I mean, Ulduvar's in on it, right? But Ulduvar basically tells his parents when they decide, like, okay, we need to pull people together, we need a summit, we need to figure out what's happening, we need to figure out how to prevent some great disaster, whatever it is that happened. It seems like it was intentional, it seems like an attack, but nobody knows who the attack came from. So they figure, let's put together a summit, and then in that process, I think they were planning on leaving out the free territories. Nobody thinks that the free territories were necessarily responsible. Or maybe they think there's a possibility that the free territories were actually responsible for it. But I think it's Fadrim who basically, with Ulduvar as a proxy, basically urges them, like, no, bring the free territories in on it. If they were responsible, then this gives us a chance to potentially find that out. And then if they're not responsible, then it may be really important for us to have them on our side. So they are trying, so that I think the summit itself, as the story opens, that is about trying to figure out what happened, who did it, who's responsible, does it mean that something else is about to happen? And so it's been a long time since there was any real war in the area. So there are ties to other nations and their allies and things like that. But they are in the process of trying to figure out what can we do to tie each other together more firmly, basically, and also, if possible, find out like who actually did all of this. And then, so the free territories get invited in, but that is part of Fadrum's plan. Fadrum wants them involved so that they can create a tie to the free territories so that he can potentially try and figure out a way to open up trade. So I think what he's doing is going to play both sides of it a little bit, where he's basically saying, on the one hand, well, it could have been them, so they should be here at the summit. And then once they're there, like, there's a lot of starfall in your territory, isn't there? And just sort of like hint at the idea that well, I don't know. There are lots of old stories about the Erdanian Empire and how they used starfall for technology and things like that. And then kind of angles things towards ultimately like, well, what if we set up trade of some kind? And so there's got to be a way. So I think that the people of the free territories have a different connection, a different history with Starfall. They know that it's bad stuff. They know that it's corruptive, and so maybe Fadrum is playing the ignorance card a little bit and saying, "I well, okay. I'm gonna think about this for a little bit. There's a little bit left on the long break, but I need to take my little dog out again. She's got a tiny little dog bladder. But I'm gonna think about that. I'm gonna come back with it. So yeah. Boop boop boop. Let's put this back up. What is it? Where's the editor focus? Long break back soon. Long break back soon. Okay, I'll be back. Okay. Dogs taken out. It is getting chilly in here. That'll be better. Okay, so I think with some of that under our belt now, I think this is probably a good time to start gently working out a little bit of the beats. So we're going to start with our first beat. This beat sheet is a bit of a custom build for me. It's made up of a couple of different beat sheet systems that I've worked with before. I don't always work from a complete beat sheet, but I do tend to try and find places where I can pin all the important stuff, like story-wise, so that I can figure out, basically like from moment to moment in the story, where am I headed? Where am I pointed? So I don't think that every story needs to be necessarily written with a beat sheet, but this is one that is complicated enough, or it's going to be complicated enough, that I think it's a good idea so that I don't kind of like lose my way as I go. So I think that we know enough about like the antagonist's plan, and I think that's a really important thing to know when you start the story, so that you can build these like initial beats, right? And I'm not going to build out these beats completely. The proper like beat sheet phase is going to be after I've sort of gone through and learned. Here we go. Let's get that started. Is going to be after I've gone through and sort of really started to expand more of like the core story arc overall, right? But it's a good place to go ahead and grab some of the details now and make sure that they are just put somewhere that I know, like, okay, these are the sort of canon details about the story that I want to get down. Anyway, so it's a good place to start with this. So, what's our neighboring nation? What's the name for this? We got Kelvier. I'm not going to get stuck up on those things. I have this tendency, like I try and figure out a name. I think you've probably seen it happen in real time at some point in these videos, but I get to the point where I'm like, ooh, this thing needs a name. And then I kind of like stare blankly at the world while I, come up with a million names in my head for one that like sounds right. So, but I'm not going to get hung up because we're not at that point yet. But I do want to save Ergost though, because it's fine and I don't want to forget it. I'll make a new type under locations. Nation of to be named. I don't know if it should be actually. No, yeah, I think it's a year ago. That gives time for Fadrum to have like sort of worked out bits and pieces of the rest of his plan once he realized the potential of what he had in hand. So yeah, a year ago. A year seems like a long time, but I can basically fill in like, okay, this summit has been approximately a year in the making, and that can sort of like raise the stakes, right? We've been trying to get this happening for so the Yeah. So that's not a. It's not a ton. It's not a ton to pin on that first beat. There will definitely be more later on. But as I discover stuff along the way that feels like, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to need to for sure hang a beat on. I think that's a good way. It starts everything. There's a whole lot of tension right up front. Something bad has happened. Nobody knows who's responsible. There is this big event that's happening, and there are high stakes, right? Because this is about not only trying to figure out who was responsible. If it was just an accident, no one knows whether or not it was just an accident, right? All that they know is something massive has happened, and now if we put this summit together, then one thing that we might get out of that is to know to find out, like, who is the last person to accept an invitation, right? Who was the last group? Who was the first group to accept an invitation? So there's all sorts of fun political stuff there that can sort of build out the initial feel and vibe of like what's at stake here and who are the players and why is it important that this all happens and that sort of thing. So for anyone that has read a lot of Romantasy, this may sound like a lot. It may sound like a lot. So I think that it is probably fair to say that my target like genre is probably something along the lines of like epic fantasy romance or epic romantasy or something like that. Like, I think this is going to be a big story. There is a reason that I initially set the target word count at 140,000 words, because I don't really know how to write short. It's really hard for me to just write like a 90,000 word, whatever sort of tight novel. I always want to do explorations like this. Even in the Simon Strange stuff, a lot of the times I do ridiculous deep dives into people's psychology around their kinks and things like that, right? So, I always want room to let the story breathe. But I think that's a good place to hit that opening note in a way. So anyway, so that is why I figure I'll jump forward just a little bit and put some stuff into the beat sheet and then pull back a little bit, because I want to make sure that is something that is pinned for later, because I think that's the right kind of opening. And I'll get more concrete and specific with that later on. So right now it's basically just sort of like, this is what's happening, of course. But eventually what that will turn into is, and in the midst of that, this is what Oren's doing. I think Oren is going to end up being the one who opens the story for sure. I could see an argument for Jurok. Ooh, well, actually, I don't know. Jurok as an opener might. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and just pin this note here. Focused on the. So, a little bit of craft talk here. Basically, trying to figure out what side of the story gets the opener, because they're both going to build different types of suspense. And this isn't a decision that I'm going to do now, but I'm trying to be a little bit like both transparent and also a little bit instructive about like my process and how I think about things, because I'm hopeful that part of what this video series will ultimately do is I don't know who is going to watch all. Let's see. If each of these is 4 hours long, and I do it 3 days a week, and I do it, that's at least 12 in a month, and over 3 or 4. Let's see, December, September, October, November, December. So yeah, after about 4 months, that's 48, 96 videos. That's 96 videos, each at 4 hours. So there's going to be like 150 or more hours of this video series, right? It's going to be a long thing, and I, I, I don't know that I'm going to edit down any of this stuff. I think on the Red platform, the the description for the channel is like the most boring videos on YouTube, basically. Who wants to watch a writer make the sausage, essentially? And but like one of the things that I didn't have when I was first starting out, and I don't think any. I mean, I just don't think there's a lot of this out there. And it's a work session, but I'm just gonna riff on this just a little bit. Look, I grew up reading these amazing books and imagining what the writer's process, what the writer's life was like in something that was somewhat mythologized, right? Like the idea that like Mercedes Lackey sat down to write the Last Herald Mage trilogy and just like had this beautiful idea for a book, and so she just sat down and she just started writing, and then she finished the book, and then she handed it off to the publisher, and the publisher said, "This is amazing, people will love it," and then they published it, and then I got that book, and I was just like, "Oh my god, Mercedes Lackey is brilliant." Which is not to say that she's not. She is. She's objectively one of the most prolific and remarkable writers of our time. But that is not the reality, and there was no way to access the reality when I started working and when I started trying to figure out how do people write books? Like, how does this actually happen? How am I going to write a book? And so I had another series way back when I first got into romance. After I'd written my first couple of books, I sort of like honed in on a process, and I made a series of these. You can still find these on YouTube. They're bored. They're really boring, but I love the idea of documenting this process in part because I feel like somewhere out there is a person who wants to write a book, wants to write a big epic fantasy of some kind, for example, right? Or romantasy, or just whatever kind of big book project. And is thinking to themselves like, well, I don't have a great idea though. Like I have ideas, but they're not really story ideas. They're not big enough to be story ideas. And I don't think that is how the process works for most writers. I mean, I could be wrong about that. And if any working authors see this and you want to jump in the comments and tell me about your pop a comment in there and talk about your process or link to another video or something like that, that'd be great. But I think that being able to see how chopped up the process can be and how you can explore different parts of a story in the wrong order and that sort of thing, and dig up bits of your world building, and then dig up bits about a character, and then dig up bits about a language and that sort of thing, and sort of slowly cobble these things together and start to mold them into something that's in the shape of a story. And then figure out like, how do you make decisions? Like honestly, starting out, I had no frame of reference for how to make a decision like this, right? So do I open with Oren? Do I open with Jurok? What are the pros and cons? I didn't have the language or the experience or anything to figure any of that out. And that's not a thing that there aren't a lot of books out there that can give you that answer, because it's one of the nitty gritty, deep down sort of craft things that it's really it's hard to capture in educational material in a book, right? And it's not the sort of thing like if you ask a bunch of authors like, how do you make that decision? Some of them will know, but for others maybe it's more instinctual, Anyways, so with that said, for me, looking at this decision, do I open with Oren? Do I open with Jurok? To me, that there's going to be suspense on either side, but it's a question of what is given to the reader to know right away, and what is hidden for the reader right away. So for me, weighing which character opens the story, and what's happening with them, and what that says, what that does for the action and the movement in the story, right? To me, that is a question of with With Orin, I could open the story and I could expound on, I could bring in the tension about like, okay, we've got this nation, this nation, this nation, this nation. Everyone's agreed to come. Everyone is on their way. We're making the preparations. Here's what's at stake for us. This is why we're doing this summit. And I can specifically leave out mention of the free territories until like maybe the last moment, and then up until that moment, it can be a question of like, who we haven't heard from? We haven't heard from anyone from the free territories. We don't know if their delegation is coming. We sent them multiple invitations and they just never responded. And then that can build a certain sense of tension right away, where there are characters on the page who are basically saying like, this terrible thing happened and everyone should be on board for this summit. The free territories haven't responded yet. I'm not saying that that's because they did it, but it certainly doesn't look good, right? And so you get that tension right away, and then we can turn it at the end of that opening chapter to talk about like, and then the delegation arrived unannounced, right? And then we learn a couple of things about them. We learn about how they do politics, for one thing. And none of this is necessarily canon. This is just what's happening in my head while I'm trying to figure out like what makes the good opening for the story, right? So that sort of sets the stage. We can get to know Orin a little bit. In the midst of all of that, we can show that he is, of course, concerned about what has happened, but also he's got this inner conflict where he knows that he has a responsibility here. He has to be here for this event. He has to be the diplomat. He doesn't feel like he's good at being a diplomat. He would much rather be, trying to learn whether or not this feeling inside of him is something real, whether or not he has magic of some kind. We can show him going to talk to the court mage and like, hey, so everybody's really busy, but do you think you could run that test one more time? Because I really think that I'm onto something here. And see the court mage basically correcting him like, you shouldn't be focused on this right now. There are way more important things at stake. So we can introduce that character tension right away at the top. And so all of that is good. And that's probably how I'll go with it. But the other option is to open with Jurok. And in that place, we get an immediate outside view of everything that's happening. And we can have Jurok coming in basically with a delegation, speaking to an advisor or something like that about what happened up north and about the fact that, they sent requests and invitations, and we probably should have responded to that. And this political tension around like, okay, well, I'm not going to do politics the way that these Northerners do because they don't understand our culture. This is not how we would have done it. We would have done it differently in the territories. And then build up a different type of tension where the reader knows that they are ostensibly not responsible. Maybe Jurok knows the facts, maybe he doesn't. But so in that case, though, we're carrying a different perspective into the opening of the story. And with that perspective comes knowledge and assumptions and suspense and that sort of thing that the reader is gonna come into the story with, right? So maybe they know right away that the free territories didn't do this, but maybe they also know, maybe there's tension going into that story, knowing that that Jurok and his delegation are arriving under the assumption that there are people up north who already think the free territories are responsible, and not just because they didn't respond to invitations in the conventional way, but maybe because there's a long history of sort of blaming stuff on the peoples of the free territories, right? So on the one hand, with Orin's opening, you jump in and you get an immediate sense of the immediate political tension and the stakes that are there in the capital now. With Jurok's story, you get an immediate sense of political and cultural tension, right? So different types of tension, and they do different types of work. When I actually get around to the part where I'm actually planning that opening chapter and I settle on the decision of which one it will be, there's a good chance that what I'll do is write both opening chapters and then basically decide after they're both written to figure out, like, okay, this is the one that I feel like works. I am currently leaning towards Orin as the opener because I think I can do a lot of character work with Orin. I think I can do a lot of plot work. I think I can introduce the antagonist. I think I can introduce Orin's family and sort of set the stage for, like, here's how Orin's life is disrupted. And between the two of them, between Orin and Jurok, ultimately they're both going to have their lives disrupted, but of course Orin is the one that's actually going to end up traveling back to the free territories with Jurok. So so his life stands to be the most disrupted, right? And then that becomes a choice to make as well, because you've only got a little bit of a window to grab a reader and get them invested in a character. And a lot of the time, one of the craft decisions that's going to determine whether or not a story sticks with someone, whether it grabs them and holds them, is how invested are they going to get in the character on the page in the first chapter. And then once you get them invested, how moved are they going to be by the ways in which that character's life is disrupted, right? So that is part of the reason that I lean towards Orin as well, is because there is not only the political tension and the potential of, like, initially casting some potential blame on the free territories and then finding out that they are showing up. That would just be a good turn. But then also, Orin is going to be initially probably the character who is going to be the most relatable to readers, and then also whose life is going to be the most disrupted. So that's gonna be a big decider, basically, in how is the story received. And that is, I mean, arguably all craft decisions are also market decisions, because good craft leads to a good book, which leads to a book that's sticky in the market, right? I am not writing this book because I think it's especially marketable. I think that maybe it hits a thing. I've seen a lot more orcs out there in the world, and I've seen more orcs in the MM space, which I'm very excited about because I fucking love some orc daddies, and they're almost always orc daddies. But it is less about how to make this book marketable, and for me, more about how to craft the readers. When I use the word craft, this is gonna be a little bit, like, wanky about writing and stuff like that, maybe. But when I say the word craft, the craft that I am thinking of is what experience is being crafted for the reader. That is, in my opinion, and if I was going to teach a class, which I maybe sort of kind of am, what I would say is that the craft of writing is the craft of manipulating the reader's experience emotionally, intellectually, maybe spiritually, depending on what you're writing. To get them to feel a certain way, expect a certain thing, and then change those things, right? That is the nature of what you're doing from moment to moment in a story, is that you are giving the reader information, and then you're revealing that information is wrong or incomplete, and then you're revealing truths. And in order to reveal a truth that is shocking, you have to give them something in the first place to have thought about, that they thought this thing was true until they learned more information, and now, oh, actually, this is the true thing, right? And I think that all of that math, all of that figuring and that calculation, that has to start ideally in the brainstorming process, but it certainly has to start on page one right away, immediately. You immediately have to figure out, what am I showing the reader? What am I giving the reader? What am I trying to convince them of, so that I can change that later, right? It's not about lying about the story. It's about giving incomplete truths, and then later on revealing more information that changes the nature of that truth, right? Anyways, that's my take on it. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. We should get back to work, even though it's on a short break, but I kind of wasted that work session there, expounding on craft and the nature of story. So expect a lot of that in these videos. Maybe one day I'll bookmark stuff so that it's easier to navigate around and find these things. Honestly, probably not though. You're probably if you really want to get into it and if you become a fan, then you're probably gonna have to watch 150 hours worth of video. Um, all right, so back to the villain's plan. What is the full plan step by step? Broad strokes, not fine detail. What does the villain need to acquire, destroy, manipulate, or achieve to get what they want? Number the steps. This matter because each step the villain takes is a complication for the protagonist, and each step the protagonist disrupts is a setback for the villain. This plan is the skeleton of your story. That is true. Okay, a tiny bit more TED Talk. The protagonist's plan in your story does not matter. Only the antagonist's plan matters, and that is because it is the nature of the antagonist to ultimately drive the story, which is weird because we call it protagonist, antagonist, and it sounds intuitively like protagonist is someone who drives the story. But if there is no plan, if your antagonist isn't carrying out a plan, then there's nothing for the protagonist to push against, right? So it's good to figure out what are all the different pieces that the antagonist needs to put in a row, and what are all the steps and the things that they need to execute. And it's best to think about this in terms of if the protagonists were not involved, if this plan could all go off without a hitch, if the antagonist had an ideal world and could do everything that they needed to get where they want to be without interference from the protagonists, then what would that plan be? That's what I'm asking here in this thing. And again, this is the villain first method. This is a brainstorm that is available in the Scribi cloud library for templates. So if you do pick up Scribi and you want a really tight method of like building out your story, this is a really good brainstorm for that because it gives you the spine really fast. So for Fadrum, we know that his plan, step 1, right. So this was kind of the easy part because this is the part that's been sort of built out already. Fadrum causes this accident, realizes a couple of things. The first thing, that Starfall could be an incredibly powerful weapon. It is an incredibly powerful source of energy. It can be used for all sorts of things, but weapons, powerful weapons in a world of magic, especially a weapon that can be wielded by people who don't have magic, means that the playing field is evened a little bit. But then it also means the development of technologies that can further level that playing field. And I think for that to work, that does mean that once we start building out the actual magic system and how people with native magic use that, and in this case, I keep saying native, and I think that there's a world in which someone arrives here and thinks that when I say native magic, I mean like the magic of native peoples or something like that. But in this context, what I mean is that Aeldra has its own magic. It's a magic that is part of the natural ecosystem and that sort of thing, and that there are people on Aeldra who have a natural affinity for magic. And so when I talk about someone who has native magic, what I mean is they are people who are in tune with the magic of this world, right? As opposed to the magic of Starfall. Starfall is foreign, alien magic, right? So people who use that don't necessarily need to have an affinity with it. In fact, I don't think there's a way to be born with the affinity for Starfall and the magic of Starfall, right? So I think there is a natural disparity between people who have access to that magic. However they practice it, they have something that other people don't have. And that Starfall for Fadrim represents the possible means of giving people that don't have that native magic some kind of magic to compete with, basically. Even though it's super dangerous and super bad for you. But we've already established that he's working on that. He's trying to figure out a way to safely use it, even though it is something that probably cannot safely be used. So he knows, like, okay, this was an accident, but it represents something huge. I think that this tells us a little bit that Fadrim is a world traveler. He's someone who's been to a lot of different places. He's made inroads with a lot of different power structures across the continent and that sort of thing, which I do think means that he's older. I do love an age gap, so maybe Fadrim is, also, in his at least 40s, if not 50s. And that makes Uldavar his younger prince lover. So love a young prince. Or maybe Uldavar is somewhat older, and actually, yeah, Uldavar is probably at least in his 30s. Yeah, I think Austri, the heir to the throne, I think she is probably closer to Uldavar's age. She may be in her late 40s. I think that makes Orin the baby of the family in a way that's gonna mean I could do some good character stuff between him and his siblings, right? Sort of like the afterthought. These two older siblings who have both been educated and have survived into adulthood, into middle age, and they are obviously set up to be the next big sort of rulers and leaders of the nation, that sort of thing. So it kind of leaves Orin in a place where he's like, what am I even for, right? There's a 20-year gap between me and my next sibling. What does that mean for me? What do I do? What do I do in this world, right? I think that'll help. Reinforce that tension that he has between the duty and responsibility he was born into versus what he really wants out of his life, right? And then, so we know that about Fadrim now, and we know that therefore he was in a good position to be the person who said to Uldavar probably this is what happened. Here's how we're going to use it. We need to pull together a summit, all of the nations to get together. We need to use this as the basis of an initial unification process, right? I think that's a good angle. I'm just going to put that note there so that I don't forget it. Fadrum has this initial push. We should pull this summit together. Get your parents to be the sponsors of this summit. Get them to pull people to Kelvir, and then that's going to take any suspicion that there might be on me and my work and us and what we're doing here. That's going to get rid of that suspicion because they're going to be really all these nations are going to be focused on each other right now. Right now, all the nations think that only a national power could have done something like this, right? Because they don't know what actually happened. So Fadrum's in a great position here politically where he can say, I was the one that went out and, spoke to these different powers in these different nations and worked through my connections to urge this summit along. I've been on the road a long time making this work. He's been out there for this whole year, going from nation to nation, basically as an ambassador from Kelvir to try and pull this together. So now Fadrum opens the story as someone with a great deal of respect from all of these world powers, right? Because he is the one that's been pushing for peace, pushing for conversation, pushing for all those things. And that helps set up his goal, because if what he wants is this new empire, right, then this is a first initial push towards unification amongst all these nations. We've all got to band together. We've all got to sign these various treaties and alliances and things like that, and then later on we'll figure out how he wants to leverage that to get ahead in his plan. And then there is a missing piece in his plan, though, which is a supply of starfall. And he knows that there is a lot of this stuff in the free territories. So his one sort of like the potential broken piece of that chain is he's got to get people from the free territories up there. And then it's not enough for them to just arrive and talk and then go home and go back to being isolationist. Instead, he's got to figure out an angle that actually forges some sort of a tie with the free territories that he can then leverage. So I think that Fadrum has already kind of become more or less the main sort of ambassador for Kelvir, just in general. I think in the opening we're finding out that this has recently become an official title for him, yeah. And then, so once they're up there, I think it becomes Fadrum's idea to basically say, like, I've been getting to know the peoples of the Free Territory. I've been reading. I've been learning. I've made inroads. What I know is that if you offer Orin up as part of this exchange, basically, then that'll be a really important thing for these people, for the Oricons specifically, and that if you do this, then we will have a clear line to them. And that also means, like, we can say, like with all of these arrangements over history, Orin becomes potentially a resource where they can be like, so what are they up to down there? We're checking in. You're kind of not really a spy, but an informant, somebody to keep an eye on things. I think there'll be tension around that right at the beginning. I think that'll be a thing that Jurok basically, Jurok or his advisors. I'm trying to decide exactly how canny Jurok is going to be as a politician. I don't think he's much of a politician, though. I think he has people around him who are politicians, possibly people around him who are in league with Fadrum, because I think Fadrum's sort of network of people is quite broad, quite large, and that'll set the stage for like a betrayal at some point, which will be good. So Fadrum's next part of the plan, we need access to the free territories. To get that, it's going to take time. It's not something that we can rush. It's not a good idea to invade. So part of figuring out the villain's plan, in my opinion, is figuring out, like, okay, what could you do? Why won't that work? What could you do? Why won't that work? What could you do? Oh, that might work, right? So I think that I know the one thing that I know won't work is there is no way for Fadrum to urge an invasion of the free territories. I think that was a potential backup plan, and maybe we'll talk about that on the page. Well, depending on when we reveal that Fadrum's the bad guy, it might be right up front or it might be later on. I don't know. Again, that depends on, it's a craft question, right? What does the reader know? When do they know it? When will it make the biggest impact to change what they think they know, right? But I think that Fadrum would know that invading the free territories isn't a great option. But he goes around and he makes these inroads, and they send out all the invitations, and they're arranging the summit, and then they don't hear anything back from the free territories. And so in his back pocket, he's got this idea like, okay, if they just don't show up, I could urge this now collected, nations of the North, like, hey, the free territories, they didn't do this thing, and I could always whip out a little bit of knowledge, like, I heard somewhere that starfall is the sort of substance that could make a weapon like this. It might have been the free territories that did it, and it makes sense that they would test it up here instead of in their own land. So, maybe we should think about going after that. So I think that was always a potential plan for him. But then when the delegation shows up, he realizes, like, okay, they showed up. That's no longer a viable plan. What's our next solution, right? And that is to try and establish trade of some kind. So, yeah. So he wants the trade, and then he needs to be in control of trade. So we've introduced a secondary antagonist here, and I don't know if I want to stick with it or not, but I went ahead and gave her a name, Karja. So Karja, I think, is someone who I would need a reason for her to be in league with Fadrim, right? And I think that Karja is potentially something of an alchemist herself. Maybe she has also sort of independently discovered some of what Starfall can do. And that among her people, that is considered, it's a taboo, basically. And so this is something that she's largely done in secret. I think maybe her and Fatrim crossed paths at some point in his search and study for this knowledge. And Karja has this idea that basically these properties, the properties of this substance, do exist. We have most of it on the continent, which means that our people, like, we could be the next empire, but that culture holds it in such a taboo that there's just no way that she's going to get the leverage that she needs. So I think that Karja has her own motivations here, and I'm going to probably dig into those. There might be two parallel antagonist stories, antagonist plans here. But I like the idea of them being somewhat in league with one another, with the idea that Fadrim is like, I'm going to use this lady, and Karja's thinking to herself, like, I'm going to use this guy. And I seem to have gotten a hair in my eye. But I think that will be good tension on the other side of it, because when Karja starts to realize that Fadrim is using her, or using her more effectively than she's using him, she knows that what she has in her back pocket is that she could take out the prince, and that could completely destabilize things between the two nations, and then she holds all the power, essentially, right? and can potentially trigger a conflict that would justify urging her people to use Starfall as a weapon. So yeah, I think that's something that I will probably explore. I'm gonna stick a note on her. We're not gonna do. I'm not gonna pull her out just yet. Actually, you know what? I am. Let's see. So we want an antagonist. Karja, antagonist. Fadrum Call, antagonist. Uh, is Oldavar really an antagonist? Yeah, Oldavar's an antagonist. Yeah, okay. So Karja, let's add a note for Karja. Um, yeah, there's some nuance there to work out, but I think it's always good. It's when you've got a when you think about like the complexities of the world that you're building and who the players are. I okay for one thing, I'm gonna own this as a writer. Among other things, I mean, I you know, I became a software engineer to build this application so that I could write books. So scope creep is like a real thing, and it's very real for me. I think the reason that Scribi has taken such a long time to build is because it started out as mostly a text editor with some cool bells and whistles, and then it became a story-based system, and then that story-base became sort of codified as an actual like full database. So for the technical folks in the crowd, Scribi runs a local instance of Postgres, basically as Postgres SQL. So it's a really robust relational database, and that grew out of my need to like I plugged another module in, and then I plugged another module in, and then I was like, okay, well, all of this data needs a better way to relate to one another, and so we got a database and blah blah blah. Anyway, so scope creep is real, and it can be real for a story as much as for a piece of software. So what I've got here is an antagonist who probably also needs to be developed fully as a character, which may mean that I need that point of view as well. So we are now looking at upwards of potentially 5 POVs: Karja, Uldavar, Fadrum, Jurok, and Orin. So we are running close to the edge of what really constitutes romantasy and getting into potential epic fantasy. The thing is, it's gonna be steamy. I really want it to be a steamy story because I really like. Again, initial inspiration was these guys over here, which I think I'm pointing in the right direction. These guys up here and down here, if you're on one of the vertical feeds. So yeah, I am. I'm gonna lean into it for now, and it may change later. But I think that Karja represents a good villain on the other side of the line. Whenever you got two people who look like they're enemies, but in reality they're colluding with each other, there is a lot of rich storytelling that you can do around something like that. And if there is one thing that I do love in my storytelling, it's rich plot stuff. So yeah, Karja, I'm going to build her out. But in the meantime, the primary antagonist plan. Once trade's established, if it can be, Fadrim needs to be in control of the trade. Okay, so the idea. All right, so we run up against one of the next sort of big hurdles for Fadrim. People in power don't let go of power, and people who don't have power are often resistant to major regime overhauls. And this is because on the day to day, I think there was a line about this. There was a line about this in A Song of Ice and Fire. That was to the tune of the commoner doesn't give a shit who the king is. The commoner gives a shit whether or not they're hungry, right? And so there is a political necessity here for Fadrim to do something that can that can weaken the status and the stance of the ruling families in such a way that when he starts to call for reform and call for change and call for growth and all these other things, that the common people will get behind him. So, in my view, part of his plan needs to be, and this is something that I may need to like marinate with for a little while and really take some time to think about. But part of his approach, part of his plan, needs to involve a means of um, convincing the common people that there is something that they are being made to go without, right? That there's all this new trade. It's good for everyone. Look at all these things that we're doing, but that's not for you. That's for the ruling families. All of the new benefits, all of the new wealth, all of this new technology, all this magic, it's all just for the ruling family. It's not for you. Look how amazing their life is. And then at the same time, what kind of selfish, terrible people would keep all these new things away from you? Who would, aren't they just awful? Don't you just want to kill them? And, and work this angle on both sides so that when the time comes and he can stand up and say, like, but look, I have this thing. You, the common people, can have this thing. Now, if you were to use it to get revenge on all those ruling people, well, if I must lead, then I suppose that I will, right? So we got to figure out what kind of maneuvering is he doing to foment the coup, to become a leader of this coup, and to ultimately encourage rebellion. Encourage rebellion. And then, as part of that process, he needs to make sure that Calvir is the main point of trade with the free territories, at least long enough to get to the point where he's got enough power to make sure that anyone else who attempts to establish direct trade isn't able to do that, right? So he needs to control the flow of Starfall, and then that, of course, has to come several steps before what is the ultimate long-term game is ultimately to push into the free territories, to take over the free territories, and take control of the supply of Starfall itself. So, So our bad guy is ultimately a colonizer because colonizers are bad guys. So yeah, all right. It's 1:30. It's a little bit shy of 2. The idea was to go from 10 to 2, but I have hit a point where I think I need to spend some time really thinking out the steps in his plan. And now, before I log off here, um, I I think that it would be easy to look at this process and think like, okay, you've barely started to touch on Jurok and Orin's story. If they are the main characters, if they are the main love interests, if they are the people that are on the book cover, then where the hell is their story at so far? I find, I sort of riffed on this before, but I find that if I have a really clear idea of what the antagonist's plan is, and I think this is true of most adventure stories. I think it's a good approach to this. Maybe not for everybody, but I would say that for the majority of stories, especially if you haven't written fantasy, adventure, that sort of thing, if you haven't written in that sort of adversarial space before, and I say that because although most stories are adversarial in some way, for example, I write a lot of contemporary romance, and I would never need to do all of this for most contemporary romance. It is sometimes true of things like some of the more recent niches, like well, not recent, but a lot of mafia romance, a lot of like dark romance in general, a lot some paranormal romance, but like there has been a big explosion and it's really popular of for contemporary or paranormal sort of cozy romance. And by cozy, I just mean that there's not a huge external plot arc involved, right? It's really about these two characters and their relationship to one another, what's standing between them, and that the thing that's standing between them often needs to be externally motivated because, otherwise you get a story that is all character development. Not a bad thing, but hard to sell. But when it comes to anything in the fantasy space, really, like you kind of need an antagonist. You need an antagonist. You need a good antagonist. They need a good plan, that sort of thing. And once you know those things, like this will probably be the session where I build out most of this plan and figure out. I know the end game now, and I feel like it's potentially bigger than one book. So we could end up with a trilogy on our hands, or at least a duology or something like that. I don't know. We'll find out. But once you have your head wrapped around like here's everything you need to know about the antagonist before you even really know anything about your protagonists, sometimes you can get a lot of clarity about the story. I mean, think about everything that we know about this story so far. We know that there's a long history of imperialism that is a long way gone, but there are still tensions and consequences in the present. We know that there is a reemergence of this old magic, this old technology. We know that someone is discovering that and taking advantage of that and trying to capitalize on being sort of the first one, right, to use this to their advantage to make a huge change in the world. Fadrim wants to turn the age, right? Even though he knows that he won't be the one to inherit that age, he wants to be the person who turns that age, right? He wants to be the great man of history, right? He wants to be that great man. And like knowing all of that and knowing what all the backdrop is and knowing what steps he's going to take means that I know when I get to the point where I'm planning out Orin and Jurok's story, not only their arc through the plot, but also their relationship to each other, right? Then a lot of that becomes really, really clear. And making that part of the story is sometimes the hardest part, especially if you don't know all this other stuff. So once you have a clear idea of what your bad guy is doing and what they need to accomplish, and you know what the steps they're going to take, a lot of writing the protagonist is taking them through part of that plan reactively, right? Because the first half of most stories, your main protagonists are going to be of course they're going to make choices and they're going to be proactive and they're going to do things, right? But up until the midpoint, a lot of the time your protagonists are going to be primarily reacting to bad things happening. They don't know the whole story yet, and but usually, at least for me, in the way that I structure stories, usually it's about the midpoint of the story where like the real threat, all along is revealed, right? So, for example, in this story, I already pretty much know that that the betrayal from Karja and the revelation that, at least to Jurok and Orin, that Fadrim is the main sort of mover here. That will happen about the midpoint. I already know that because that's sort of how I do story structure, right? And that tells me some really great stuff. It tells me that between the beginning and that midpoint, there are tactics and strategies about how I deliver Fadrim's point of view chapters or Ulduvar's point of view chapters. That there are things that I need to let Orin and Jurok in on, let them know, and I know what they need to suspect. I just know all sorts of stuff about their story, right? So even though we haven't touched their arc yet, really, already there's so much to know. Already there is so much to know to build off of, so that building their arc, the first half of it will be really easy. Figuring out what's happening, how are they reacting to it, what are they targeting, what are they looking for, what do they think is the problem, how are they going after the problem that they think that they're solving, right, up until the midpoint. After the midpoint, now, there's something called the second act lag, the second act slough, drop, trough, whatever. Basically, what it means is that in the second act of a story, it's really easy for the action to die down. And part of the reason that that can happen is because it's if even if you know what the antagonist plan is and you know how your characters are reacting to and exploring that plan up to the midpoint, after that they have to get proactive, right? They have to make clear decisions about how they're going after this, the real root of this problem, how they are going to fix what's wrong with the world in some way, or they're part of the world, right? And as they when you get to that point, a lot of stories fall apart around there because there's a natural instinct to get the protagonist to the midpoint, and they're largely reactive, and then let them still be reactive after the midpoint instead of proactive, right? And unless you have that midpoint turn, then what you get is a sense of, okay, and they're going to do something any second now. They're about to be heroic. No. Oh, okay. And now we're at the climax, and now they're doing something heroic because they're in the final battle, and that's where you get that drop in the second act. So I will take you through my process for that probably in the next session, because I think there's a lot here for me to think about, for me to sort of dig down into. I'm not going to do a ton of actual work in the project off camera because I kind of want to make sure that all of this is kind of documented. And also I should be doing other things with my day as well. And I can't stream for 8 hours straight, so I'm not going to. And I have another book that I really do at some point need to start work on, probably for Simon Strange. That one, I don't even think I can stream writing the steamy stuff in public for this. I don't know what the policy is for the various platforms basically around that. For those, I may have to switch to the gaming platform, because I don't think they have very many rules at all. Yeah. So, anyways, that's where we are. That's where we'll stop today. Next session, if you join me for it, we'll talk a lot more about the protagonist's arc and how to build the protagonist's arc against the antagonist arc. Right, so that'll be a lot of fun, and this is becoming this is becoming a little bit more of a class on story development than I kind of intended it to be. But I think that that's okay. I'm just gonna let this go where it's gonna go. I'm gonna let my brain take me wherever it's gonna take me, and as long as I stick to the plan, as long as the book gets written, then what you see and hear and hopefully maybe learn or at least give you something to think about along the way, like all that is fine. All right. So the next session will be Monday of next week. That'll be August something. I don't know. It won't be August. Maybe it'll be September. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31st. No. September 1st, I think. Is that right? Or August 31st? I don't know. Let me look at my calendar. I suppose you don't need to see this part, me going through my calendar and figuring out what day things are going to be. August 31st. Yeah, so August 31st from 10 to 2. I'll meet you here, and I will do a lot of thinking in the meantime, but I won't be doing a lot of work in the actual project itself because I don't want you to miss anything. But I will, I'll make notes in the scratch pad or something like that if I have thoughts in between sessions. So, yeah, there you go.